I never knew true chaos until I moved out to what was supposed to be my peaceful dream home. One day, I was in the city, fed up with crowded sidewalks and car horns blaring at 2 a.m. The next, I was standing in the middle of a wide field, marveling at how quiet and endless the horizon looked. Little did I realize, behind those beautiful rolling hills lurked the absolute worst nightmare any homeowner could face: HOA Karen. Armed with a clipboard, a permanent scowl, and an obsession with rules, she would stop at nothing to control my life, even if it meant destroying my property or staging a literal car crash. Before we dive into the madness, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel if you love stories full of drama, humor, and a certain Karen who just can't mind her own business. Hit that like button if you think she's about to get what she deserves. Comment below with your city, because I'm dying to know where you're watching from. Now let's rewind to the day I arrived, excited for a tranquil escape, only to be welcomed by a raging storm named Karen. My move-in day was perfect: bright sunshine, a gentle breeze, and a sense of relief that I'd finally left behind the noise of the city. My property was a good 5 acres, complete with a little pond and a gravel driveway that wound through tall, golden grass. I had also upgraded my vehicle to a shiny new electric truck, a sleek silver model that hummed quietly instead of roaring like the old gas guzzlers. In my head, I pictured sunny afternoons spent fishing at the pond or planting a small vegetable garden. But on my second morning, while I was dragging moving boxes out of the truck, I noticed a figure striding down my driveway. She looked like she'd marched straight out of a corporate meeting, hair sprayed stiff, posture ramrod straight, and the biggest scowl I'd ever seen. She clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Are you the new owner?" she demanded. No introduction, no "welcome to the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. Yes, that's me." "I'm Karen," she snapped, flicking her gaze toward my electric truck with clear disapproval. "Head of the HOA. This area has strict guidelines." Something in my gut twisted. I'd specifically chosen a place I believed had minimal HOA oversight, but apparently I was wrong. "Guidelines?" I asked cautiously. "I understood this was private land." Karen gave a smug half-smile. "The roads belong to our community, and your vehicle must be approved for use, especially an electric one." I stared at her, confused. "Approved for what?" She tapped her clipboard. "We have a policy about large vehicles damaging roads, especially those that aren't, shall we say, standard gas models. You'll need to fill out the correct paperwork and wait for board approval. In the meantime, you're not allowed to drive it freely." My jaw nearly hit the ground. "I'm sorry, but this driveway belongs to my property. I'm not sure why you think the HOA can ban me from it." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you learn all our rules soon. If you don't, you'll face consequences." With that ominous statement, she pivoted and stalked away, leaving me standing in my own driveway, wondering what on earth I'd gotten myself into. The next day, I woke up ready to continue unpacking. I stretched, poured some coffee, then wandered outside to admire the morning sun. But my peaceful moment shattered when I spotted a row of vicious metal spikes bolted across my gravel driveway. They looked like something out of a police chase on TV, sharp, angled metal teeth meant to shred tires in an instant. For a few seconds, I just blinked, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. Then my heart pounded as the truth sank in. My first thought? Karen. Who else would do something so extreme? My mind raced. What if I'd driven over them in the dark? My expensive new tires and probably the undercarriage would be ruined. Anger boiled up. This wasn't a petty HOA notice about mailbox height. This was deliberate sabotage. I grabbed my phone, snapped a dozen pictures, and stormed over to Karen's house. By the time I hammered on her front door, I was practically shaking with fury. She opened it with a sugary sweet smile. "Yes? Can I help you?" "What is wrong with you?" I exploded. "You place spike strips on my driveway. That's dangerous and completely illegal." Her voice was deadly calm. "We call them road deterrents." "Road what?" I demanded, absolutely stunned. Karen shrugged as though discussing the weather. "The HOA voted that your vehicle is not permitted. You refused to acknowledge our guidelines, so I took action. If you insist on driving that electric contraption, you have to abide by our rules. Or else." I grit my teeth, trying not to scream. "You can't just decide to block my driveway with lethal spikes. What if I need an ambulance?" "This is sabotage." She just smiled. "You're free to move them, if you sign the required forms and agree to the HOA regulations." Otherwise, watch where you drive." I felt a surge of red-hot anger pulse behind my eyes. I pointed a trembling finger. "You'll regret this. I'm going to call my lawyer." Karen cocked her head. "Oh, how dramatic. Let me know how that works out." I stomped away before I did something I might regret, but inside my mind I was screaming, how can someone be so unbelievably crazy? That afternoon, I sat in my living room, phone pressed to my ear, talking to Matt, my longtime lawyer friend who'd seen me through a few real estate deals. "She put spike strips on your driveway?" Matt asked, sounding half amused and half horrified. "Yeah, real ones, like the police use. She's out of her mind. Is this even remotely legal?" Matt snorted. "Absolutely not. This qualifies as property damage and potentially reckless endangerment. I can draft a letter right away demanding she remove them and pay for any damages." "Thanks, man," I sighed, relief sweeping through me. "She's making life miserable." Matt paused. "I'm guessing she's not the type who will back down easily, so keep documenting everything. Pictures, videos, anything that proves what she's doing." "Oh, I will. I've already got photos of the spike strips." We hung up, and I felt a little better, imagining Karen's face when she got an official letter from a lawyer. Of course, I knew she'd probably snarl and tear it up, but it was a start. That evening, I decided to remove the spike strips myself. I slipped on some heavy gloves and carefully unscrewed the bolts, my hands trembling with anger the whole time. Then I tossed the metal contraptions to the side, making sure to get plenty of pictures. Early the next morning, I headed outside to charge my electric truck. I loved how quietly the truck drove. No rumble, no pollution, just a gentle whir. I'd even installed a special charging station on the side of my garage. But when I reached for the cable, I found it lying on the ground, severed. The protective rubber had been sliced cleanly in two, and exposed wires stuck out, sparking faintly. My heart pounded. I stared, half in shock, half in rage. "No, no, no, no," I muttered, crouching down to inspect the damage. This wasn't some animal chewing on cables. It was too precise. This was deliberate. I grabbed my phone and snapped more pictures, my mind racing. "Karen," I whispered under my breath. "She did this." How far was this woman willing to go? First spike strips, now cutting my charging cable. Was she going to slash my tires next? Blow up my mailbox? Break my windows? My frustration burst into a short, mirthless laugh. I almost felt like I was in some weird horror movie. The HOA strikes back. I dialed Matt again. "She cut my charging cable." He let out a low whistle. "She's really dedicated to terrorizing you, huh?" "That's one word for it," I grumbled. "What can we do?" "Let's file a police report. Vandalism, property damage, and keep gathering evidence," he advised. "This is good for us legally, but it's obviously horrible for you day to day. I'm so sorry." "Me too," I muttered. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop her." I decided to confront Karen one more time, maybe reason with her before things got worse. I marched over to her house, ignoring the anxious twists in my stomach. To my surprise, she opened the door with a wide, artificial smile. "Why, hello," she cooed, batting her eyelashes like a cartoon villain. I forced a polite tone. "Karen, you cut my electric cable." Her eyes widened in the biggest display of fake innocence I'd ever seen. "Cut your cable? I have no idea what you're talking about. Did you see me do it?" I ground my teeth. "My security camera didn't have the best angle, but it shows a figure matching your height approaching my garage last night." "You mind explaining that?" Karen shrugged, flipping her hair. "I take walks at night, good exercise. No law against that, is there?" I resisted the urge to scream. "Your name will be all over the police report, Karen." She placed a hand dramatically on her chest. "Police? My goodness, you're so sensitive. Perhaps you should check your cables more carefully, dear. They can get worn out, you know." I narrowed my eyes, words failing me for a moment. Finally, I just snarled, "You'll regret this," and spun around, leaving her chuckling behind me. As I walked away, her voice floated out sweetly. "Have a lovely day." 2 days later, I got a notice shoved into my mailbox. "Emergency HOA meeting. Attendance mandatory." I almost crumpled it up out of spite, but curiosity won out. Maybe I could confront Karen in front of the other members, show them how insane she really was. The meeting took place in a small community center that smelled like stale coffee and old carpets. A dozen people were seated in folding chairs, looking uneasy. At the front stood Karen, gripping her clipboard like it was the Holy Grail. As soon as I walked in, her eyes locked on me. She cleared her throat and announced in a theatrical tone, We're gathered today because certain individuals, she aimed a pointed glare my way, are not respecting our guidelines. I slumped into a chair, arms crossed. An older man named Frank gave me a sympathetic grimace, while a woman named Judy just looked petrified to be there. Karen launched into a speech about protecting the neighborhood from environmentally suspicious vehicles and dangerous modifications. My jaw dropped when she described my electric truck as a metal behemoth that can short-circuit and cause massive fires. A man in the audience piped up, Karen, that's not how electric cars work." She swiveled around, glaring daggers. "Excuse me, do you have a degree in advanced vehicle electronics? Because I have done extensive online research." I nearly snorted. Online research, my foot. Then Karen pounded her fist on the table. "We must impose stricter measures. This newcomer refuses to follow basic rules, uses some weird electric contraption, and threatens everyone with lawyers. He's out of control, and we need to shut this down." I stood up, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I'm out of control? You installed spike strips on my driveway, cut my charging cable, and now you're calling me a threat? Give me a break." Judy timidly raised her hand. "Karen, is it true about the spike strips?" Karen forced a brittle laugh. "I placed a harmless deterrent to protect our roads. It's all in the guidelines, Section 4, Paragraph 12, I believe." "Actually," I interjected, "I read your guidelines cover to cover, and there's nothing about installing dangerous traps on private driveways." The room fell silent. Karen's mouth twitched. Clearly, she'd been caught, but she waved a hand dismissively. "This is about protecting the neighborhood, dear." A few neighbors muttered to each other, looking uncomfortable. Finally, Frank spoke up. "Maybe we should, handle this calmly. Let's not do anything illegal." Karen's eyes flared. "Illegal? I'm only enforcing standards." I couldn't hold back a sarcastic laugh. "Right. That's why my lawyer's already drafting a case against you. So keep it up, Karen." She shot me a death glare, then abruptly called the meeting to a close. It ended with no real resolution, just tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. About a week later, after months of frustration, I was driving home from town. My electric truck purred quietly down the winding country lane. I was feeling oddly optimistic because Matt had told me the police were taking my property damage reports seriously. We might have a case soon. As I turned a corner, I spotted Karen's blue sedan up ahead, drifting strangely across the road. Alarm bells went off in my head. Her car was weaving left and right like she was texting, or maybe trying to run me off the road. I slowed down, carefully keeping to my side, but suddenly her car lurched toward me. The next thing I knew, crash! She clipped the front of my truck. Metal crunched, and my seatbelt dug into my shoulder. My heart hammered. I slammed on the brakes, the electric truck skidding on the gravel. When we finally stopped, I jumped out to check if she was okay. Karen stumbled out, staggering around in a scene straight out of a bad soap opera. Oh, my back!" she cried, pressing a hand to her forehead dramatically. A sinking feeling hit me. She was faking. Her eyes darted around, and she moaned so theatrically I almost expected an opera singer to pop out. "You crashed into me!" I snapped. "Why were you swerving all over the road?" Karen threw up her hands, speaking in a voice loud enough for the whole county to hear. "You drove straight at me! I had to avoid your monstrous electric truck!" I stared in disbelief. "What are you even talking about? You veered into my lane!" She started snapping photos with her phone. "I'll have plenty of evidence that you attacked me, you and your weird electric thing." My fingers clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. She did this on purpose. People from nearby houses came running out to see the accident. Karen instantly launched into a dramatic speech as if she were on stage. "He drove at me like a maniac," she wailed, pointing at me. "I've told everyone how unsafe his contraption is, and now look, he's crashed into me." A neighbor, Sarah, looked at the crumpled front of my truck, then at Karen's relatively minor door dent. Karen, it looks like you're the one who sideswiped him." Karen widened her eyes and let out a huge gasp. "Are you questioning me, Sarah? I know exactly what happened. I was the victim here, forced off the road by his monstrous battery-powered machine." I almost laughed at how ridiculous she sounded, but I was too furious. "I have a dash cam," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen's head jerked toward me, her expression flickering. What?" I tapped the small camera behind my windshield. "It records everything, and guess what? It caught you swerving into my lane. Should be interesting for the police, don't you think?" Her face drained of color. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she clutched her side. "Oh, my ribs!" she moaned. "I need medical attention. This is so painful." Someone had already called the police and an ambulance. The whole scene was ridiculous. Neighbors standing around, Karen feigning an injury, and me feeling like I was trapped in the worst reality show ever. When the police arrived, Karen's performance escalated. She sobbed, claimed I'd been tailgating her, and insisted I forced her off the road. She even laid on the ground for extra dramatic effect. I kept quiet, letting her dig her own hole. Once she finished her wild accusations, I calmly offered the officer my dashcam footage. The officer, a seasoned-looking guy with a mustache, raised an eyebrow at Karen. "Ma'am, is that okay with you?" Karen flailed her arms, as if mortally offended. "He probably edited that footage. It's all lies." Mustache officer pressed his lips together. "We'll see for ourselves." We played the clip for him, me driving steadily, Karen's car weaving all over, then swerving directly into my lane. The officer's eyes narrowed. "That's pretty clear," he said. He looked at Karen, who was still sprawled on the ground, moaning. "Ma'am, would you care to explain why your vehicle is seen crossing the center line?" Karen's voice rose 2 octaves. He must have manipulated it. He's a tech wizard. He has an electric truck, for crying out loud." My jaw tightened. "Karen, that's absurd," the officer sighed. "We'll do a full investigation. But for now, it appears you're at fault. If you don't need actual medical help, please stand up." Karen shot me a venomous glare like a cornered animal. Slowly, she stood, attempting one last weak groan before dropping the act. A few days after this staged crash, my phone buzzed with a call from Matt. He sounded almost giddy. "They're filing charges against Karen," he said. "She staged an accident, and with your dash cam footage, plus the earlier vandalism reports, the police have enough to press charges." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Finally, some justice. "But I know Karen. She'll keep going until she's forced to stop." Matt's tone turned serious. "I think that day is coming. The cops have everything they need. It's not a minor traffic violation. She orchestrated a collision. That's a big deal." I thanked him and hung up, my thoughts swirling. Karen had nearly ruined my life. She shredded my driveway, cut my charging cable, tried to get me in trouble with the HOA, and now staged a crash that could have killed someone. My anger was replaced by a sense of grim satisfaction. If the law was about to step in, maybe she would finally face the consequences of her actions. About a week later, just as Matt predicted, the police came knocking on Karen's door. I stood on my porch, heart thumping with anticipation, phone in hand, ready to record if necessary. 2 officers marched up to Karen's house. She answered with her usual tight scowl, clipboard in hand. From my distance, I couldn't catch every word, but her voice was shrill. "What do you mean, charges? You must be joking." One officer calmly explained something, gesturing to a piece of paper, likely the warrant. Karen's face went from pale to bright red to ashen gray in a matter of seconds. "I'm the victim here," she screeched, voice echoing across the neighborhood. "That man has been a menace to our community. I was only doing my duty to enforce the rules." The second officer stepped forward, removing a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Ma'am, please turn around. You're under arrest." Karen clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. "You can't do this. It's all a misunderstanding. I have rights. This is oppression." "Ma'am," the officer repeated, firmer this time, "turn around." She let out a wail so dramatic it almost sounded like a siren. "I demand to speak to your supervisor. Do you have any idea who I am?" But her fury got her nowhere. The officer placed the handcuffs on her wrists, reading her the standard Miranda rights. Karen's shrieks reached a fever pitch. "This is an outrage! I'm calling the mayor! I'm calling the governor! I'm calling—" They guided her to the police car, and she fought every step of the way. Her face was twisted with rage and panic, a far cry from the smug, superior expression she usually wore. I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in watching her meltdown. A small group of neighbors stood outside, some with phones recording, others just wide-eyed and relieved that the tyrant was finally being taken down. As Karen was pushed into the back seat of the squad car, she caught sight of me. Her voice cut through the air like a rusted knife. "You'll regret this! You have no idea the power I hold! You're finished in this town!" I folded my arms, gaze steady. "Karen, you brought this on yourself." The car door slammed shut, muffling her last frantic cries. The police cruiser pulled away, its lights flashing red and blue against the evening sky. I watched until it disappeared down the road, her shouts fading into the distance. Karen was gone. She wouldn't be placing any more spike strips or cutting any more cables. She wouldn't be staging any more accidents or screaming about non-existent HOA rules. The final image I had of her was through the tinted window of that police car, furious, defeated, and on her way to jail.